So the second speaker in this session is Abeezer Tapia. He's the Global Head of Business Development for MC10. This is a startup company based in Lexington, near Boston, so thank you for coming over for this presentation. And the company recently introduced the Biostamp wearable sensor, and I think we're going to be hearing from Abeezer about that, so please.
Great. Thank you. So the microprocessor, it came out about 50 years ago, has fundamentally transformed how we live our lives. What if you can take the computing power of a microprocessor and build it into a bendable, stretchable, twistable system? That's our objective at MC10. And why is that? So let's take the iconic iPhone. Came out almost 10 years ago. When it came out, it was heralded as the epitome of design. And that's fantastic. However, at the end of the day, this is still solid, rigid, and boxy. And the reason why is because everything in here is solid, rigid, and boxy. And unfortunately, that makes for a fundamental modular mismatch with the human body. So where does that leave us in today's wearable landscape? You end up with devices like these. So first a show of hands. How many of you there own a Fitbit, Jawbone, fitness tracker of some sort? Okay. Now the better question. How many of you still wear your Jawbone fitness tracker of some sort? Okay. After 3 months, you see a 30% drop off. They end up in your top drawer. And I think it's after 6 months, it's about a 70% drop off. And if you look at these devices, again, they're based off that same clunky, hard, visible technology. And you know, if it makes a statement. So, you know, if you're one of that 20 to 80-year-old, what we call worried well, that's fantastic. But what if you have a chronic disease and you want to discreetly monitor your health? Or what if you have a chronic disease and you need a medically validated way to monitor your health? So then you come to research-grade devices, which often many of these are validated. But the tricky thing about these is, as you can see, they tend to be even more clunky, bulky, and constrained than their consumer counterparts. At the end of the day, patients don't want to wear a sick badge. So let me see. How many of you can see this pretty clearly? So what I'm going to use now is kind of as an art of the possible, and kind of to kind of get your creative brain thinking. I'm going to use the MC10 Biostamp as kind of a model, which I'm going to talk about for a little bit of the talk. So this is our Biostamp wearable sensor. So it's, again, flexible, very conformable. And you'll see, actually, it literally is, on the other side, a mini computer. It's got a microprocessor on here with cache memory. It's got 32 megabytes of flash to capture the data. It's got 4 different sensing modalities, from actigraphy to temperature to a gyroscope to surface EMG to ECG. It's got Bluetooth Low Energy to send this to a smart device up to the cloud. And then it's got a polylithium battery for recharging. So all this is great, but candidly, nothing I just mentioned is really revolutionary. What's revolutionary is you can do everything I just mentioned in this wild of a form factor. So what does it mean once we have this form factor? It means, effectively, you can place it anywhere on the body, meaning you can place it where you need to place it to take that measurement. Second, you can have tight skin coupling to erase noise. And third, you can have multiple of these sensors located on your body that actually talk to each other and are time-stamped in synchronization to do a lot of the analytics that Christian's group has been doing thus far. So what are those? There's 3 key advantages to being able to do that. A, you have the ability to get more accurate data. So let's stick with Parkinson's for a second here. Imagine you have someone with a Parkinson's shuffle. Is the best way to measure that from a clunky device, even if it be research grade, from the wrist? Or is it perhaps somewhere on the lower extremities? You can also, second thing is you can now measure novel metrics you were not able to measure before. Again, with Parkinson's. For example, things like gait, movement, and balance. Is that something you can accurately measure from the wrist? Or perhaps you need something on your core and perhaps your lower extremities as well. And finally, because of the form factor, because it's so small and discreet, the feedback we get back from patients and physicians are, again, patients don't want to wear a sick badge, and therefore they see the adherence and the compliance to this go up. So we've been talking quite a bit about the hardware for a bit, and equally important, if not more, is the software aspect behind it. Just to give you guys a sense, at MC10, our software team is as large as our electrical engineering team, our mechanical engineering team, and our material sciences team all put together. And why is that for? So we take, first of all, how do you take data from the sensor and send it to a smart device up to our MC10 cloud? We run a slew of different analytics and send that back down, whether it be a clinical researcher, whether it be a patient, a physician, or a caregiver. So there's a couple different methods we can do this. A, we can provide our MC10 standard dashboard. But what gets more interesting for, I think, for our pharma partners, like Roche, is to provide an API, where now you guys can pull this information into whatever form and fashion and function that you'd like. For example, Christian, in his PD platform he's created, can now pull this information and integrate it into his platform and have one single platform for that. Now, from a commercial perspective, assuming you have the commercial teams have created perhaps a patient-facing app with Roche branding and, and the Roche experience, you can now, again, you don't need a separate app. You can take that information from the API and pull it into that same Roche app, again, to maintain consistency with your branding. So, okay, we've talked quite a bit about wearable sensing. That's great. How does this actually make an impact in healthcare? How does it make an impact for pharma and diagnostics? So there's two big buckets that we find that you can make an impact. One is on the R&D side of the business for, let's call it clinical trial innovation. And two is on the commercial side of the business for companion diagnostic devices, also known as pill plus, also known as beyond the pill. There's a slew of different kind of phraseologies for that. So what is this? This is something many of you are probably very familiar with. This is patient diaries, subjective patient diaries. This is how billion-dollar drugs are getting approved today. This is how hundreds of millions of patients are getting their care today. What if, instead of this subjective patient-recorded information, you can have objective, real-world data? That not only you actually measure objectively the outcome of that patient, of an episode, but specifically then log that in a longitudinal pattern to really give the clinical researcher or the physician a real snapshot of how the patient's health overlays. So let's touch on the R&D side first of all, the clinical trial innovation component. So here are a slew of subjective pain points where I'm sure many of the clinical researchers in this room can really empathize with. So let's take the typical example. You have a patient, they come, a clinical trial patient, they come to PI's office, let's say every 2 to 4 weeks. They stay there for X hours, and then they go home. And then they come back 2 to 4 weeks later. Well, what happened in between all that time? What if you can have, again, objective, real-world data on what's happening to that patient during that time frame? So what if the clinical researcher had a dashboard like this that provided, again, objective, longitudinal information on that patient? It could truly, the feedback we've gotten back is it truly can transform the game. Now there's kind of two different ways clinical researchers can leverage this data. So A, you can leverage this data for current primary and secondary endpoints. So whether it be a 6-minute walk test, a timed up and go, whether it be for Parkinson's, a UPDRS scale, and input that data into that. But what gets kind of even more exciting, and some of the work that Christian kind of alluded to, is exploratory endpoints. So we've heard a lot about digital biomarkers, we've heard a lot about digital endpoints. What are exploratory endpoints out there that you can actually measure? Maybe some, again, here's this example of random metrics out there from, again, from a clinical grade perspective that actually will give you the efficacy of the medication at a much higher rate and a better rate and a more efficient rate than our old, archaic, decades old primary and secondary endpoints and scales that exist today. So what does that mean for a clinical, for R&D in general? So that means with this objective information, you can potentially lower trial size, lower trial duration, and something I know Tom is looking very closely with, as you assess the go and no-go decisions, give you much more objective decisions to make quicker and more confident go, no-go decisions on a specific compound. So let's turn to the commercial side of the business. So again, I'm going to stick with Parkinson's. You have a Parkinson's patient comes in to see his neurologist once every 6 months for, say, a 22-minute average visit. So how'd the conversation go? The physician's like, so how's your Parkinson's going? As a patient, how do you answer that? You look through your diary and you're like, oh, I think in April I had a relapse, and your caregiver pokes you on the shoulder. No, honey, actually in March you had another relapse. So what if, instead of that, I'm going to show you the same dashboard. Imagine this is a physician-facing dashboard this time, or perhaps even a patient-facing dashboard. The physician gets an objective view on how you've been doing. And they can see that actually your gait was off in March. And they can specifically address the patient in that conversation, that 22 minutes. Oh, it looks like you might have been off on your gait in mid-March. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So it really opens up the discussion for, again, real objective, real-world information, real-world symptoms, and leads to better care because the physician is now getting better data and now able to use that assessment to provide the best care possible. So if you talk about the care continuum, so most of these opportunities we're talking about, especially in the commercial landscape, fall on the latter half of the care continuum, which is disease management, which is perfectly fantastic and fine. And again, this is very early days for everything we're starting off at, especially in the commercial space. One thing I would encourage the diagnostic folks in the room is to think, how can you go earlier in the care continuum? How can we go beyond sick care to more preventative care? What does that mean for Roche Diagnostics? That would mean instead of you actually open the aperture and you open the funnel of patients you can actually touch with a Roche technology, therefore giving them better health outcomes earlier in the care continuum, which is better for the healthcare system overall. So a couple things that are important that I want to drive home on. So one, in wearable sensing, one is validation. So I know clinical validation is a very loaded term, so I'm going to stay away from that term for this discussion. And I'll give you, so what you really want to do is validation to the gold standard. So I'll give you an example. So what we're doing right now, one of the metrics our Biosam system can do is provide you a slew of metrics on, and I know sleep is also a very loaded clinical word, so I'm going to use the word nighttime restfulness. So we can give you metrics on nighttime restfulness. So how do you compare that to the gold standard? So what we're doing is we're actually running an IRB clinical study at Mass General Hospital in a sleep lab, comparing against the gold standard, which is polysomnography. And you kind of validate on two respects. A, you validate on the sensor level to make sure your sensor is up to par along with their sensors. But B, on the metric level, which is a software component. And the great thing about the software component is if you find out your metrics are off a bit from the gold standard, the beautiful thing about software, it becomes easy to fix. So you can then tweak it to match the gold standard. So I can't underscore the importance of validation, especially as we talk about medical wearables. Just to give you guys even a sense from an MC10 perspective, besides this MGH study, we're running another study with MGH in cardiology with the EP labs. We're running a study at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign with MS patients. And also we're working with Dr. Ray Dorsey, who some of you may know, on Parkinson's and Huntington's disease specifically. Again, to really get that ground truth validation. Another critical component is the human factors component of this and the ease of use. So a lot of you are looking at me like, Abeezer, come on, that's obvious. I know it's obvious, but it's so critical. I'd like to say at MC10 we have an obsessive focus on the human factors component. So what do I mean by that? So some things like comfort. Let's pick comfort. How do we make our sensor as comfortable as possible? That takes a tremendous amount of effort from our mechanical engineering team, our material science team on encapsulation to make sure it's something that's as comfortable as possible so the patient will wear it as long as possible. Second, things like design aesthetics. Again, these are people. They have to want to wear it. Again, that's where the discreteness actually fills in as well. And finally, a really big part of it is the adhesion. So when you're talking about an adhesive sticker to put on an individual and the sensor patch, this is something where we have teams and teams of people focusing on this. Because you can't just have a patch that sticks onto your skin. It also, on top of that, on the other hand, can irritate not only one skin type, but the entire plethora of different skin types out there. So a tremendous amount of validation is required in these efforts. So I want to touch a little bit about how we see the future of medical wearables. So from a high level, it's actually very similar to technology in general. Faster, smaller, cheaper, more efficient. I'd say with medical wearables, a couple additional adjectives you add would be thinner, more flexible, and therefore more comfortable. And we're actually already progressing towards that level. Just to give you an example, I don't know if you can see on my hand, I'm actually wearing a wearable sensing technology currently. So it's a disposable tattoo-like sticker sensor that MC10's developed with L'Oreal for skin health. So effectively, it's circuitry as well as colorimetric assays that detects the different UV levels, and based off your UV levels, it has a different color change. And how it's created is you take your smartphone, which has near-field communication technology, you swipe it over the device, it takes a picture, sends it to the cloud, takes a reading of the color change, and sends information back to the user. So how wild is that? And this is for a consumer application. Imagine the possibilities as we talk about chronic diseases and chronic disease management. The other part about the future of sensing is what are all the different sensing modalities that are out there today? So again, today you have out there today and coming in the future. So today you have activity, you have temperature, you have gyroscope, you have things like ECG and EKG. Now, on MC10's platform, we also have surface EMG. So what's kind of next frontier? So we see as kind of the next frontier, we see a lot of exciting advances in galvanic skin response. Is something really interesting. And something we're really excited about, which we have in prototype phase, is pulse ox, so blood saturation level through, again, a patch, as well as blood pressure through a patch. If you can do blood pressure without a cuff, that's going to be pretty groundbreaking. I'm pretty excited about that. Now, just in an air of transparency, there are some things that are quite a ways away. So EEG, for example, just to be candid, is something we will not be able to do in our form factor for many years, I can tell you that. So a couple of just kind of key kind of takeaways and kind of learnings I want to kind of share with you guys, having worked with a slew of different partners, is one is risk. So every company, especially candidly healthcare companies, are very risk averse. So let's stick on the R&D side. Let's think of a clinical operations team. You are incentivized to take a compound from A to B or from A to 0. If that is your mission, why in the world would you introduce additional risk, i.e. a wearable sensing technology, i.e. any sort of digital health technology, into your program broadly? Let's look at the other end of the spectrum. Imagine you're on the commercial side of the business. You have a blockbuster drug. Again, why rock the boat? Why introduce a digital health companion device with this new therapy? So this is where I've seen the companies that make the most progress on this front have buy-in from the top, from the leadership. The leadership sees the vision, sees the opportunities that digital health can make in the short, medium, and long term, and drives that down into the organization. I think the last thing I end with is you guys just got to dive in. You just got to dive in today. Candidly, pharma is fantastic at taking compounds from concept to reality. But candidly, when you oftentimes expose them to innovative technologies, they become quite paralysis by analysis. So let's take an example. iPhone version 1. We're going way back, early days, right? iPhone version 1 didn't even have cut and paste, and it sold over 50 million units. Similarly, digital health is in early days today. So what I would really encourage you guys to do is really, again, dive in, get involved in the digital health, run pilot tests as much as you can, gain learnings. I'm telling you, this is not a field where the fast followers will win. This is a field where the early comers who will gain the learnings will build a foundation for the learnings and build their digital health kind of strategy implementation based off of that. So with that, I'll end. Any questions you guys have, please feel free to email me at atapia@mc10inc.com. And actually, if you guys want to, I'm wearing, I don't know if I told you, I'm actually wearing, I think 4 sensors on me right now on various locations on my body. If you'd like to actually see some of the demo of the systems, please feel free to stop by the booth. And with that, I guess I just end by saying I'd really encourage you guys again to really dive in, and happy innovating. Thank you guys.